knows about that.
And I guess I just have to ask, why didn't you plead guilty?
I wasn't about to plead guilty to a crime I had absolutely nothing to do with. Wasn't going to do it.
Buckle up for a heart-wrenching journey into the lives of those who've been wronged by the very system meant to protect them. We'll take you inside the cells, the courtrooms, and the moment when justice finally prevails. You won't believe the raw emotions captured on camera as these innocent souls taste freedom for the first time in years.
Today, Missouri Judge James Welsh ordered his immediate release, ending one of the longest wrongful convictions in U.S. history.
I was actually watching a soap opera, and it thing went across the news break or whatever they call them, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing.
So that's how you learned?
That's how I learned.
What you're about to hear will break your heart. Kevin Strickland was only 22 years old when he was charged with first and second-degree murder by the state of Missouri in 1979. His charges were the result of a truly evil and cold-blooded homicide that took the lives of 3 people. On October 25, 1978, in Missouri, a house was found ransacked with 4 victims in the house. 3 of them had been fatally shot, and only one of them, a woman named Cynthia Douglas, had survived with a gunshot to her leg. She crawled out and told the police what had happened. A group of assailants had attacked before tying them up and shooting until they thought they were all dead. The day following the killings, Strickland was taken into custody and charged with the victims' murders. Following Strickland, the suspects, Kilm Atkins and Vincent Bell, were taken into custody. Strickland was arrested after they found a fingerprint of Strickland's on Bell's car. Even though Strickland insisted that he had only driven Bell's car the last time he saw Atkins and Bell before the murders, he was made to join a police lineup, where the only survivor, Cynthia, pointed him out as one of the criminals. Strickland didn't stop pleading his innocence in court and during investigations. He appeared before 2 juries, and the first one had a black African-American juror present. This juror refused to find him guilty, and as a result of this, the prosecutor in charge of the case did everything in his power to remove black jurors from Strickland's cases, and by the next trial, Strickland was made to stand in front of an all-white jury who didn't waste time in finding him guilty. His innocence was never considered, even though 2 of the actual perpetrators wrote direct statements saying that Strickland was never involved and was watching television at home, as he said. The system that was supposed to protect a young life like Strickland's had been riddled with corruption and racism. Kevin was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, while the actual killers were sentenced to 20 years, of which they served under 10 years. It would sadden you to know that Kevin spent 43 years in prison, and he was denied retrial every single time he asked for it. The turning point was when Cynthia Douglas later confessed that she was pressured to pick out Strickland by the detectives and police officers. Cynthia tried to have her testimony recanted several times without success. In 2015, the prosecution revealed an email from her where she formally documented her recantation before she died that same year. The tables turned, and before long, there was pressure to get Strickland out of prison. The prosecutor of the county where Strickland was sentenced published a letter on May 10, 2021, saying that she believed that Strickland was innocent. Before then, Strickland had attempted to appeal to the Supreme Court of Missouri, but it was dismissed. The prosecutors of the county, federal prosecutors, and more than 12 lawmakers, among others, petitioned to have Kevin released. The petition was denied in 2021, and the governor of Missouri at the time, Mike Parson, refused to have Strickland released because his case wasn't a priority and he wasn't sure that Strickland was innocent.
Let's just call it what it is. This is wrong. And everyone that works in this system must find a way to do the right thing now. The right thing is getting Mr. Strickland out.
The prosecutors did not stop fighting until they got what they wanted. Strickland was 63 years old by the time he was finally released.
It's going to be the first thing you do if and when you get out.
Well, I mean, I hate people to hear a 62-year-old man say this, but I'm a mama's boy, and I got to go see mama. I got to go hold mama's hand, yeah.
However, the attorney against the release, Eric Schmidt, made sure to slow the process down so Kevin couldn't get his one wish. Strickland's mother died a few months before Strickland was released, Kevin's reaction to getting out eventually after this will not shock you. He was a man dealing with losing the one person he wanted to see the most.
Procedural hurdles caused his case to be delayed and later dismissed. His mother passed away on August 21st.
It does show just how incredibly difficult this process is. Even when the prosecutor is on your side, it took months and months for Mr. Strickland to come home. And he's still going to come home to a system that will not provide him any compensation for the 43 years that he's lost.
The people who heard of Strickland's case created a GoFundMe campaign and raised $1.7 million for him. Despite not receiving any compensation from the state that wrongfully convicted him, he had enough money to do one thing he wanted to do since he couldn't reunite with his mother. Strickland left the prison in a wheelchair due to some heart attacks he had in prison. Speaking of being unfairly punished for crimes he didn't do, Richard Jones endured more hardship than he should have, even in the event that he had committed the offense.
I hope and prayed every day for this day to come, and when it finally got here, it was an overwhelming feeling.
Everything about this case is wild and just wrong. Richard Jones was made to spend 17 years in prison for a crime he knew nothing about. What made this case shocking is that every eyewitness to the robbery had claimed they had seen Jones rob someone. Jones was charged with aggravated robbery in Kansas City in 1999 when he was accused of robbing a woman of her purse in a Walmart parking lot. Jones provided a strong alibi, which many people confirmed. Jones had been at a birthday party that day. The victim had told the police that the person who robbed her looked exactly like Jones. Jones was eventually identified by the eyewitnesses in a lineup and charged with aggravated robbery. The part that would make you angry is that Jones was arrested and charged without any DNA tests conducted to see if there was a match. There was no physical evidence tying Jones to the robbery, and yet Jones was sentenced to prison where he spent 17 years until something was noticed. The man in the lineup, who eyewitnesses claimed was Jones, was never him in the first place. The man who had committed the crime was a dead ringer for Jones, and Jones had been arrested instead of him. This caused the case to be reopened. Jones contacted the Midwest Innocence Project, the same operation that helped our first man, Kevin Strickland, gain his release. They helped him find the real perpetrator, and everyone was shocked to see that Jones had a doppelganger. And like the myths and stories we've heard, doppelgangers do try to ruin your life.
Here's what they found. That's Jones on the right, Amos on the left. Both men with almost identical skin tone, facial hair, and cornrows.
The real suspect was Ricky Amos, and he was eventually brought in and made to stand side by side with Jones for the victim to identify. The eyewitnesses could not tell who was who, and that was when the judge and everyone realized Jones had been serving another man's time. Jones's release was ordered by the court, and he was released on June 8, 2017. Ricky was housed in the same prison where Jones served 17 years for a crime he didn't commit. Crazy, right? Jones's reaction was refreshing to see. You could see that although the state had wronged him for most of his life, he was happy to be free after being wrongfully convicted. A year after Jones was released, he filed a petition where he asked the state to pay him $1.1 million in compensation and publicly announce his innocence. He received $1.1 million, a certificate of innocence, and all of his biological samples about the case were destroyed. He was also granted counseling and permission to have health care benefits. By this time, Jones maintained no ill will towards Ricky and decided that a fresh start was due. Even though this man was innocent of the murder of a teenager almost 22 years ago, he spent 20 years in jail before gaining his freedom.
You want this system to say it made a horrible mistake. Yes.
On June 19, 1996, in the Bronx, teenager George Collazo was murdered and a man named Richard Rosario was convicted for his murder. Richard's story will fill you with hope for innocent people serving time for a crime they didn't commit, and anger for a failed law enforcement system. George was shot and left to die. 2 weeks later, his friend and someone who owned a food cart were called in to look at a lineup of pictures. The person they picked out as the suspect was 20-year-old Richard Rosario. At the time of the murder, Rosario had been in Florida and had to be called by his parents to be told that he was wanted by the NYPD for the murder of Collazo. He thought his alibi was good enough since he was truly in Florida. However, what he didn't expect was to be arrested and found guilty in only a few hours. He had become the suspect of Collazo's murder. Rosario had only done what was right. He turned himself in, gave his statement, and even gave the police the names of 13 people who knew he was in Florida. He also gave the police the bus ticket he used for the travel, as well as the addresses of the people who saw him in Florida. Why then was Rosario found guilty of murder 2 years later, even though all evidence showed he was innocent? Well, corruption happened in the very system that should have helped him. The Exoneration Initiative was able to get the new district attorney almost 20 years later to re-examine Rosario's case. The way Rosario's life, freedom, and reputation were played with will leave you disgusted.
Every time I think about that cell.
Torres says he was never contacted by New York police. Others on the list reached by NBC News say the same. Rosario was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life.
As you just heard, the NYPD never investigated or contacted the people that Rosario provided in his alibi. That's not all. What was not mentioned by the people the Exoneration Initiative interviewed was that Collazo's friend never pointed out Rosario in the picture lineup. The other so-called witness, who was also the food cart owner, never saw the gunman in the first place. Nothing was tying Rosario to the murder of Collazo in any way. Due to this devastating discovery, Rosario's case was reopened and he was brought to court after 20 years in prison. It was found out that Rosario was never provided effective legal counsel before he was sentenced for the murder he didn't commit. Rosario made one request as he was being released on March 23, 2016.
The public should know the truth. The families of the victims should have that clarity and that peace of mind that, a murderer is not in the street and that their son received the justice that he deserved.
Rosario's story never changed, and he was eventually released when his name was cleared as he requested in the last clip you just saw. He could be seen beaming for joy when he was finally cleared. That was not all, because he did get compensation. When he was asked how much would have been enough for compensation, he said that no amount of money was enough to get all those years back after the NYPD ruined his life. Rosario's story was a major part of the Dateline podcast. His story and case were thoroughly investigated by Dan Slepian. His story ran through 10 episodes and garnered attention from all over the USA. Richard Rosario was awarded $5 million by a jury in a federal court 6 years after he was released. The saddest part about this man's life was that Rosario had just gotten married when he was arrested. The members of the NYPD at the time Rosario was wrongly convicted never faced the music for what they did to Rosario. However, he decided a fresh start away from the media was the best for him. Get ready for another gripping installment that will leave you on the edge of your seat in our next video, Convicts Targeted in Court.